Stork'd family, and welcome to the podcast in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. I'm really excited with this next guest, Ambi Kavanaugh. She doesn't highlight all of her many accomplishments, so I'm going to take a quick second and do that for you now. Ambi was formerly a lawyer in the London area in the UK, and she moved to the States, went through this massive life transformation, and now she is one of the most prominent healers in the LA area. She has written a book called Chakras and Self-Care, and that can be found on any place that you normally buy books, Amazon bookstore, etc. And she does sound bowl healings and has this wonderful gift of intuition. But here she's going to talk about her personal journey to become a mom and the trials and ups and downs that she went through. And she's going to talk about balancing her legal, scientific, type A brain with this deep intuitive knowing and her healer brain. And I think that's a really interesting topic of conversation for us all to explore. I know it's something that I wrestle with a little bit in the process with my own journey, is thinking about when to listen to your gut and when to listen to science or when to listen to the stats and data. So here, welcome Ambi. I hope you enjoy it. And don't forget, if you love this podcast, to please give us a review, follow us on the website, on Instagram, tell your friends, spread the news, all that wonderful stuff. Here is Ambi. Hi, Ambi. Welcome to Stork'd, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Julia. I'm really excited that you're doing this and very honored to be your guest.
Well, it is such a pleasure to hear your story. I'm excited to share with our audience both your own personal journey around thinking about fertility at a slightly older age. I'm going to use the word slightly, as well as the various resources and tips and tricks that you used along the way. So to get started, can you tell us a little bit about your current family makeup? Who's in your family?
Sure. Well, there's my husband, Kevin, who I've been married to for 3 years now, 3 years and a few months. And there's our baby boy, Asher, who is slowly becoming a toddler. He's actually 13 months old next week. So yeah, it's just the three of us for now.
Congratulations. 13 months. That must be an exciting age.
He is so fun, so delicious. He's just amazing.
Well, so you've got an interesting path to how Asher came to be in your life and how this family was composed. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Sure. Well, I think marriage and family life came to me later in life at an older age than I'd anticipated. I met my husband at 39. I was married by 40, and we started trying for a family when I was 40. We did go to get ourselves checked out and sat with a fertility doctor. And my reassurance, I found my fertility wasn't as depleted as what you would expect your results to be when you are over a certain age. So that was reassuring. But at the same time, my doctor sort of said, regardless of all of that, we can't ignore the ticking clock. We can't ignore that you're going to be, you're 40 years young, as he liked to call it. So we recommend, given everything is as it stands, you should go off and try by yourself for a few months. And if you don't get lucky, then come back and see us and we'll start on some treatments. So we were kind of happy with that. And a few months passed and, we weren't pregnant. And so we ended up starting with IUIs.
Okay.
Which is basically intrauterine insemination. And basically over the course of 18 months, I ended up having 4 IUI treatments. And as anyone who's been through this knows, but perhaps for those who haven't been through it don't know, is that it's not quite as simple as being turkey basted as such, inseminated in that way with your husband or your partner's sperm.
That's right.
There's a lot more to it. You are getting injections. You're having to inject yourself to stimulate your egg production. You are having to go into the doctor every other day for scans to seeing, where all the follicles are, and, how many eggs are potentially going to drop, et cetera, et cetera. And then after that, after the insemination takes place, you're then taking either progesterone pessaries or progesterone injections. So it's a real process, and it's a lot of hormones and drugs and things like that. And so I did 4 of them. I also had 2 minor surgical procedures to remove some polyps and other things that were, kind of in my uterus that were probably not aiding conception of a healthy baby.
To clear the path, so to speak.
Clear the path, exactly. Yeah. And, as time progressed, I found it certainly quite challenging to go through those procedures just because there's just a lot of pressure that you're putting on yourself when you're going every other day to the doctor's surgery where you're waiting in a packed waiting room full of a bunch of other people who are desperate to have their baby. And there's just a lot of, there's a lot of anxiety and anxious energy about it. I mean, I'm such an empath that even if I felt in a good place about it, I'd be picking up on other people's sort of stories because, there's some people who it was their fifth time doing IVF and they still hadn't, gotten pregnant and things like that. So I found it energetically quite draining. I also found it physically quite draining because I'm just super sensitive. And so all those hormones and drugs were just something that would take my body a little hot minute to get used to.
Let's talk about that for a second, because you've talked about yourself as an empath and you are in the healing and wellness space, my profession. And here you are taking quite a bit of hormones, quite a bit of synthetic drugs, and navigating a very emotional process. How did you think about the juxtaposition between your energetic life and this very real, very physical, very hormonal life that you were leading?
Well, I mean, to answer that question, it kind of fast forwards us to the end result, which is Asher, which is that I conceived him naturally, which I think for me was always meant to be my journey. That I was meant to go through that process of sort of almost trying to, manipulate my body into doing something that it didn't want to do in that way and that it wanted to do organically. And so for me, a lot of this journey of doing these treatments, and it was kind of working with logic and statistics and age and the advice of highly qualified professionals, and also going with my own intuition. Because on the one hand, I had all those factors like my age, the advice of all these doctors, ticking clock, all this, that, and the other to deal with. And on the other hand, I always had this kind of deep within, I would have this voice, which was my higher self, my intuition, my soul sort of saying, this isn't the way that it's going to happen for you. And I think for me, the journey was about A, listening to your intuition, and B, understanding that my body actually was capable of doing this completely naturally. And my body was much stronger and healthier and much more fertile than even the statistics and the blood work showed.
It sounds a little like you had to go back to trusting yourself or back to connecting with your sense of intuition.
Yeah.
Were they significantly in conflict with what the doctor was telling you, or did it come later?
No, I mean, it wasn't significantly in conflict, but, I used to be a lawyer. So there's a part of me who is very logical, very sensible, very fact driven. And so I could look at that and I could sort of say, we should definitely give this IUI a chance. We should do this. And okay, it didn't work. So let's give ourselves a month off and let's do it again. And okay, now there's, a polyp that's grown. So let's remove that, give my body a chance to calm down, try naturally. And okay, whatever. And it was really all building to the point of this kind of like, into this tipping point, which is that the doctors were like, you should be doing IVF. It's now you've done 4 IUIs, like IVF is the next natural step, especially your age, because by this point I was 41 and a half, right? So, then we sort of talked about it, and I was quite strongly opposed to doing IVF, and I couldn't work out what it was that I was opposed to. But I remember just feeling this like visceral reaction where I was just kind of like, ooh, I don't feel good about this. And part of it was that, IVF is a huge undertaking physically and emotionally for anyone, as well as financially. And so I couldn't work out what it was. And I got to a point where I really sort of sat with myself quite quietly and said, is this about your ego? Because, I fell in love with my husband. We had the most romantic courtship. It was kind of this very fairy tale kind of, romance. And there was just this energy about us and our union. And in a way, I guess I wanted that energy of our union and our connection to be the way that a child came into this world. And so I had to really sit with that and just say, okay, if you end up having a child through IVF, is that going to take away from the connection that you guys have? It's still your child. It's still going to be, part of each of you. So yes, this baby is not necessarily going to be created from this romantic and passionate and deeply connected evening that you spend together, but that doesn't mean that it's not a really loved child and a really special being who is representative of you both. And so when I sat with that and kind of looked at some of the reservations I had about IVF, I got to the point where I was like, I don't want my ego to get in the way here. And, my husband and I talked about it at length, because we also, at one point, I was like, what if it doesn't happen for us? What if we're not meant to have children together? Like, what does that look like?
And how did you guys answer that question for each other? So when you're thinking about not having this child, what did that feel like? What did it bring up for you?
That was pretty challenging because I think the one thing I knew from my very first date with my husband was just what an amazing father he would be. And I think the one thing that everyone's always said about me, since I was quite little is like, you're meant to be a mum, you're meant to be a mum. So it felt strange because I had never really considered the concept of having a child in any other way other than biologically. And to me, that was something that was quite important and quite special, and especially to have it with, the person who I'd finally found my person, is to have our biological child together was the goal. And we did talk about it lightly, sort of like, okay, what if it doesn't happen for us? What if it doesn't happen for us? And I had some friends who were going through foster adoption at the time. And so, and from different families, from heterosexual couples to my gay friends who are happily married, and they were going through their own process. And so I also had other people's families forming in their own ways around me as something to look at and think, well, is my path meant to be different? But when I got silent and quiet with myself, I knew that having our own child biologically was my truth and my husband's truth, certainly. And we came to the conclusion that we certainly weren't going to give up on that possibility until we'd exhausted all options. We've done 2 or 3 IUIs at this point, but that's, some people spend several years doing several rounds of IVF before they get their miracle baby. So we didn't feel like we were ready to throw in the towel quite yet. So for us, then it was a case of, okay, so maybe we need to take things to the next level and go to IVF. Like maybe that's the way that our baby will come into our life. So actually at the doctor's office, I moved from having one of the male doctors as my kind of primary doctor to a female doctor who had actually been through the journey herself. And it's quite interesting because she was considerably younger, but had fertility issues younger, because some people do. It's not necessarily, as I've learned, about your physical age as much as it is about your biological age.
And was that important to you to have somebody who had gone through the experience and had familiarity with it?
Yes, that's exactly why I moved her, because she was female. She'd been through it herself, and I felt a deeper resonance with her. I felt that I was able to, not that I particularly questioned her about her journey, but I just felt that she would get certain things. Plus, women understand other women's intuition. We understand and respect, I think, each other's deeply, deeply intuitive natures and how those little nudges that we get should be followed. So she and I sat down, had a conversation, and came up with a plan. I was pretty opposed to traditional IVF. I'd researched it all for myself, and I wanted to do a mini IVF, which involved considerably less drugs and would probably yield less eggs.
Can you tell us a little bit about the contrast between a traditional IVF and a mini IVF?
Yeah, the traditional IVF is just a longer process and it involves more drugs. And with that process, you are really looking at getting a higher number of eggs. But the whole process is just more intensive. It takes more time. It involves a bunch of different drugs. And it's just everything is more. It's just longer and harder on in all different ways, energetically, physically, financially, in all different ways. And so the mini IVF just involved less drugs and a shorter time period. They were able to just stimulate you in a certain way that they could just do it in a quicker, easier way. And because of my blood levels and fertility profile alert, they felt that this actually could be quite successful for me. So that was then the plan. However, we were waiting for me to get my period, and then we could start the process to start the mini IVF. The idea being that I would be doing the mini IVF before the end of the year. This was in 2018. And my body decided to ignore whatever it was that they were trying to do to kind of manipulate it, and decided that it wanted to ovulate. And so on one of these days that I went in, she was like, oh my God, I can't believe that you're going to ovulate. And I was just like, I could feel it in my body because I really am quite sensitive to the sensations within. And long and short of it is we did one final IUI, and that IUI was unsuccessful. And even when we were doing it, I said to her, I know this is going to be unsuccessful. But what that meant was that I wasn't able to do that mini round of IVF before the end of the year, which really actually upset me and threw me off because I'd finally got my head around it. And then, my body decides to ovulate. We do the final IUI and didn't work. I wasn't pregnant. And then we had to wait till the following year. We had to wait to January to start because everything shut down for the holiday period.
What about the timing was important to you? The end of the year seems like a really critical milestone. What were you holding on to about that time?
Well, actually, it was more financially based because we had, with our insurance, we had paid a certain amount out of pocket. And so our insurance had kicked in a way that, starting again in January would mean that we need to spend X amount out of pocket before the insurance kicked in again to cover it. So it was partially a financial thing, but it was also just like, let's do this. I'm going to be 42. Let's do this. Let's do one round, see what it yields. So, so it was partially financial, but partially also just, completely practical, because it's like, hey, our insurance has kicked in. Great. We can do a mini round this year with that, see what our yield is, and then move forward in the new year on the basis of what we get. So then it was kind of like, okay, it's now the end of the year. And, we decided to relax. I actually turned around to my husband. I said to him, listen, I've just did some meditating about it. I went on a bunch of hikes by myself and just really took some time to process what my truth was about it. And I just said to him, listen, I need the pressure to be off. So I don't want to think that 2019 is the year of getting pregnant and having a baby. I want to think that 2019 is the year of IVF, because if we're going to do this, we may as well get the enough embryos from this that we can have 2 children, hopefully. So let's just take the pressure off and say 2020 is the year that we're going to have a baby, but 2019 is the year of like getting ourselves ready, getting everything,
making it like a preparatory year, like a get ready year.
Exactly. And so we had that in mind and went about our lives and had a really nice Christmas celebration and this, that, and the other, went away for a few days, etc., etc. And I remember it was January 7th and I was due to get my period that Thursday or Friday, which was my dad's birthday on the Thursday. And my dad passed away years ago. And I remember saying to my husband, I feel like my dad's going to give us a gift this year. I don't know what it is. And I woke up in the morning and I had this weird intuitive thing. I was like, I'm going to take a pregnancy test. And I saw my husband wandering around and thought, oh, he hasn't gone to work yet. So I'll brush my teeth and then I'll tell him I'm going to do a test and we can just do it together. And by the time I came out of the bathroom, he had gone to work. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just do it. And I peed on the stick and 2 lines came up. And I was like, oh. And the funny thing is I was elated, but I was also like, yes, of course, you're pregnant. Like it was just like such a deep inner knowing. Anyway, I was pregnant and, there's a whole bunch else that went on after that with all these tests and checking, your hormone levels and your HCG, and then is the baby going to be okay, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the long and the short of it is I was healthily pregnant with a baby boy, and that's now my 13-month-old who I hope is napping right now.
It's such a great story. And I love the part where you're talking specifically about your inner knowing, because it sounds like the inner knowing was kicking in all along. Like it was telling you, maybe this isn't the right path, or maybe this isn't the right time frame. So tell us a little bit about the juxtaposition between the inner knowing and the science in the logic. You've got this rational lawyer brain that is your old self and the empath intuitive that is your new self sort of coming at a head here.
I prefer to think of it not as them coming to a head, but them working together. And in the same way that I burn essential oils, but I also am vaccinated. I would take painkillers if I was in a great deal of pain, but I also work on meditating and doing other things to clear energy blocks that might be causing headaches or other things. So for me, my whole approach is taking science, modern medicine, and all the gifts that it gives us, and working with that and my own intuitive wisdom and deep inner knowing and all the holistic things that are available to us. And so I don't see them as being as opposites. I have no regrets about the fact that I did, all those IUIs. And listen, if one of those IUIs had resulted in a healthy baby and pregnancy and child, then I would have been absolutely delighted. I just think that part of my journey was about understanding the power of my own body, because looking back, I think I'd always had this innate fear that there was something wrong with me and I was infertile. And then to find out that I could get naturally pregnant at 42 with a really healthy, gorgeous little cherub was just so affirming of just me and myself. I also really, really enjoyed being pregnant.
Which is not something a lot of people say. That's an unusual statement.
Yeah, I loved being pregnant. I also had, pregnancy for me was such a abundant, fecund time in every single way, in my professionally, in my social life, in every single way. I loved every moment of it. I worked up until about 8.5 months pregnant, which I don't necessarily think that, everyone should do. Everyone should listen to their own bodies. And that certainly that was the energy of Asher as well inside of me. I think that's just his energy. It was kind of like affecting me in a certain way. But yeah, I really enjoyed being pregnant. And I did have a bit of a long labor. It was 27 hours. I did get induced. There were a few other things that made it all a little bit more challenging in some ways. So the whole process for me has been affirming about the fact that, my body is strong and is capable of doing these things, that I'm strong and capable of doing these things. And for me, the whole science thing and medicine and modern medicine and facts and data and all of this thing, it's like, yes, you have to look at that because it's really, really, important. And I think one has to be realistic, right? Statistics are there for a reason. I mean, you have to look at statistics and sort of analyze them in a certain way, but then you have to also remember that there are these freak incidents that take place, these forces of nature, these little miracles that take place. And I think one of the things I remember posting on Instagram was sort of, when you're told that there's a 99% chance that something won't happen, believe in the 1% chance that it can. And for me, that's what Asha was about. It was about believing in that miracle, the miracle of life, the miracle of my own body. And I feel extremely grateful every single day that belief was rewarded with him.
So is the lesson from Asher and your pregnancy about the power of using a combination of your intuition and the medical system and our science? Or is it more a lesson about just having faith in the process?
I think it's a mixture of both. My mum's always said this. My mum used to be a nurse, and she's always said, like, doctors aren't God. And you shouldn't expect them to be, and you shouldn't treat them as though they are, and you should always question things for yourself. So for me, it was about, understanding that there were certain facts and figures and statistics that I respect because they're facts, right? But at the same time, understanding that I had to sit with that in alignment with, what I was feeling about my body. And the funny thing is that the time that we had, just before I got pregnant with Asha, when I had my uterus sort of cleared out, I'd been saying to Kevin for a while, my husband, I feel like there's something blocking implantation. And I'd actually said to the doctor, I feel like we should do something to just check that there's nothing blocking it. And when they did this, initial check, they're like, oh yeah, there's some uterine adhesions in there. We definitely need to clear those out of the way so that you've got a nice, clear, soft, lining for the embryo to attach, et cetera, et cetera.
And how did you know that was something that may be happening for you?
It's just intuition, pure intuition. That was just like what I felt. It was just like a gut feeling. I had no symptoms. I had no reason to believe it. It was just what my gut told me. It's like there's something blocking it. There's something blocking the successful implantation. And it turned out that was it, because literally I had that second procedure and I think I was pregnant within about 6 weeks.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Now, you said at the beginning that you knew all along that your motherhood was calling to you. It was something that was really important to your self-identity and how you wanted to show up in the world. Did that ever waver, that sense that motherhood was part of who you were meant to be? Or has your self-perception changed as a result of this journey?
Yeah, there was definitely a time sort of, I think around 36-ish, 37 to probably about 39, where I was like, oh, maybe this is not meant for me, because I was steadfastly single and out of choice. And I was just not where I wanted to be in my life. I'd moved countries in my mid-30s, which is a strange age to be starting again almost. And I didn't have the mental headspace for a relationship. I really knew I needed to be by myself for a while. And I've always been pretty traditional. I've always wanted to be a mother, but I haven't just seen it as being sort of like me, about me being a mother, me being a mother. To me, it's been about falling in love with someone. And as a result of that love, this other life coming into the world, so here I was
So like creating a family, creating a partnership.
Yeah, creating a partnership.
Creating a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a real legacy in a way as well. And a legacy of your love, right? That's what, to me, your kids, for me anyway, that's what my child is. Our child is. It's like he's a legacy of our love. But so suddenly, when, between 37-ish and 39, when I was steadfastly single, no real interest in dating anyone and really working on myself, I was just like, my life was in such a way where I was working all the time, didn't really have the desire to be with anyone. I'd really lost my mojo. And it was also a bit like, God, how is this going to happen for me? Like, am I even going to meet someone? Is this even a possibility? And I did for a hot minute think about the idea of having a baby by myself, but that just didn't resonate for me at all. It felt like that took away from the purity of why I'd always wanted to be a mother. I'd wanted to be a mother to be part of a family. Like I felt that family unit was something sacred that for me was something that I wanted to create. And then I just sort of was like, maybe marriage and kids and all of that thing, like maybe that's just not my path in life. And can I be happy without that? And I got to the point where I decided that I would be able to be okay if that wasn't what was meant for me. but I didn't want to not make an effort at all to not invite that into my life. And so I really, I took 2 years that's a whole podcast episode in itself. I was actually completely celibate for 2.5 years. There was nothing in my life. Like, I was celibate. And like I said, it was very much out of choice. And I lasted a lot longer than I thought it would. But I feel like that time really allowed me to understand myself better, to understand my inner workings, understand myself psychologically better, some of my shadow, all of these things, and to get very clear on, the fact that I would be okay and survive, and not survive, but hopefully thrive if this didn't work out for me. But also, if I did want a partnership, what exactly did I want in a person, and what did I want the relationship to look like? And lo and behold, when I did meet my husband and it all happened quite quickly, I was just kind of like, oh, that's why I had to be single for 2.5 years, and not just single, but celibate single.
And when you're talking about building a family or building a partnership and spending some time in 2.5 years getting ready for that, what were some of the things that you had envisioned? What were some of the things that you were preparing for and getting ready for in welcoming in a family and a partnership?
Well, I think the most, just cheesy as it sounds, the most important relationship is a relationship with yourself. And for me, I wasn't looking externally. Right. So I wasn't kind of going, oh, this guy's come along, or this person, or what is it that I want? Like, if I want the person to exhibit these qualities and these traits, do I exhibit them? Do I have those? If I want them to be doing X, Y, and Z in their life, am I doing that in my life? Like, if I want to have a relationship with somebody where it's like this energetically, and it's like this physically, and it's like this spiritually and emotionally, and it's like this in terms of how much we laugh to each other and all of those things, like, am I prepared to be that as well as to receive that? So I really kind of put it on myself of just like, okay, you have to understand yourself and to get really clear on who I was, and what exactly I wanted. And that was a really amazing, quite lonely at times, quite palpable loneliness at times, but it was a really powerful process, because the things that I've been looking for in someone perhaps 3 years before were not the things that I realized that I actually wanted in somebody X amount of years later. It was much less about sort of ticking boxes, and it was much more about like the qualities of that person. Do you know what I mean?
Sort of like broadening the definition a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you spent all this time trying to figure out who you were to some extent, or putting words in your mouth, but what I heard you say was a sense of clarity. You spent time building a sense of clarity for your identity and how you wanted to show up and who you wanted to invite in as a partner. Has that clarity changed now that you're a mom?
No, I think it's got even sharper, because, number one, I feel as though, when you have a baby with somebody, anyone bringing a child into a relationship, it can really change the dynamic in some kind of ways, right? Because you go from being the two of you to being the three of you. And it doesn't matter how wonderful your relationship is, it will get tested because you're tired and, all of those kind of things. And to me, the clarity I got after Asher was born, and in the year or so since he's been on this earth plane, is just how much I chose the right partner, to do this with. And listen, things aren't as romantic as they were when we first got together, just because we just don't have.
They never are, right?
Right, we just don't have the time. And it's something we're aware of. Like, we're going to go on a date night soon, but not that we can really do much. This year has also not been helpful. But I was just like, oh my God, like, this is the person I was meant to do this with. Like, all those other people that I have dated over the years, and maybe sometimes gone, oh, he should have been the father of my children. Like, oh, it's like, no. They, as much as they may have been wonderful human beings, they weren't meant to be the person that I raised a child with. And so it was very affirming of the fact that that time and space I gave myself and that clarity that I got really called in the perfect energetic match for me. Again, someone might look at me or my husband and be like, oh, whatever. But for each other, we are, that special person. The whole process for me has been very affirming. And, I always used to read, when I was on my journey, I would try and look for stories that inspired me, that what I wanted could happen. And so when I'm sharing this with you, it's kind of nice to actually be interviewed about this, because I really hope that it gives hope and faith for someone else who might be wanting the same things. Because, we all want different things. And for some people, their path to parenthood or to family is completely different. And that's all good. It's just like, we're just all different people who want different things, right? But for somebody who wants what I wanted, to know that it can still happen, and it can be this real fairy tale in many ways.
It's so interesting. Your intuition is sharp today, because my next question was going to be just that. If somebody were thinking about having a baby a little later in life, in their early 40s, what is the message or the takeaway that you would want somebody to hear from your story?
That it's possible to have faith, and not just to have faith and, your body's ability to conceive and to gestate this little being and bring them into the world, but also just specifically to other women is just like, I think we've been sold this story that, if you're not married with 2 kids by the time you're 35, then you're an old hen, you're off the shelf, there's no one out there for you. And if they do come, then they're going to have baggage. Or there's just all these ridiculous things that are just made up by this conditioning and these snidey sort of comments that people make and society makes, not even a specific person, it's just society makes, the media makes. And what I would say is that, for me, my story is proof in the magic and the miracles. There was someone out there who, just like me, had never been married before, been in other serious relationships for sure, had loved and lost and moved on and done all those things, but who hadn't met the person that they wanted to spend the rest of their life with. And we met, and we did meet older in life, we did meet later in life. And sometimes we're always like, oh, what if we'd have met when we were 27 and this age and, whatever. And it's like, no, you guys were meant to meet when you were older. I was in my late 30s. He was in his late 40s. That's when it's meant to happen. But now look, we feel like a young family. Like, yes, age-wise, we might not necessarily, but we feel like we are. And just to not limitation on yourself that like, oh, just because I'm this age or whatever, that it can't happen for me. Like, why couldn't you have the romance of your life in your 40s and the family that you've always wanted? It's possible. It's happened to me, and I know it's happened to other people.
So if somebody were to look at your life and say, I want this as a template, I'm hoping to call in the perfect partner, or nobody's perfect, but the ideal person for me, and I'm hoping to build a family with that person, is your message to trust that everything will work out, or are there suggestions or things that somebody might do to encourage things to work out a little bit more towards the direction or towards their hopes and expectations?
Yeah, well, I think that we can have hope and faith, but I think hope and faith and dreams need to be backed with action. And I do think it's really important to take action, and to not just sit back and go, well, I want this and I believe it's out there, so it's just going to land on my lap. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, I had to put myself out there. I had to not only do all the work that I did on myself, but I had to also put myself out there beyond my comfort zone. And so I would just say to people, it's just like, hold on to your hopes and dreams and have faith, but back it up with action and be accountable. Like,
what sort of actions might you do? If you're talking about backing it up with actions and accountability, what might somebody pursue if they're curious about inviting in a family life?
Well, I think number one, the thing for women, any women, whatever your age, really, but especially as you start to get a bit older, is get your fertility checked. Go and be proactive about it, because doesn't matter if you're single and you've no interest in dating, find out where you're at. If you know that that's something you want in your life at one point in years to come, find out where you're at, get your blood work done, have the scan of your ovaries, make sure everything's working as it should be, start tracking your cycle, start taking supplements and, replenish yourself and eat slightly differently, et cetera, et cetera. So start with that, because that's just going to make your general health better. But also that's planting the seed of one day I'm going to be preparing to get pregnant, and I'm going to start now, even if that's in 5 years' time. It's never too late to start. It just helps your general overall health. And then I think when it comes to inviting in a family, if you are like me, because I know that everyone is not, but if you are somebody who is wanting to have that traditional family marriage, soulmate, that kind of relationship and bring a child into this world, then I think that you also have to be really tough with yourself and ask yourself hard questions. Like, we lie to ourselves more than anyone else, and ultimately we get in our own ways. I got in my own way for several years, and that 2.5 years that I was really fully celibate and single, I was able to see that very, very, very clearly.
Can you clarify that a little bit? How do we lie to ourselves, or what are the ways in which somebody might get in the way of their own achieving what they want?
Well, I think that sometimes people say, I really want to be in a relationship, I really want to be in love, and I really want this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, then why are you making decisions? And I say this is a question that I said, why are you making decisions and going into relationships that aren't going to take you into that direction, that are just dead ends, really? What's the point of that? What's the purpose of that? It's just, you have to kind of ask yourself, like, where is my head at when I'm entering into something? Like, if I'm 100% sure that I want to meet my husband, I want to meet my forever after person, and I want this next relationship to be one that is all of those things, then you're going to approach dating very, very differently, right? So I wasn't dating people, and once I did start dating again, and when I met my husband on the first date that we had, which was actually just a coffee date and a walk around our neighborhood, which, by the way, very strangely, we met online, but he actually lived 2 blocks away from me. So all kinds of weird synchronicities that we were meant to be together. Like, I have no doubt in my mind about that. But, you know, I went on that first date and I was like, all right, I like this guy and I definitely want to see him again. And so I'll definitely have a dinner date with him. Had a dinner date with him. He was kind of a bit nervous and goofed around a little bit. And I was like, okay, there's part of me that was kind of like, you know, oh God, you know, I can be quite judgmental, to be honest. So I was just like, oh God, he's a bit nervous. And he kind of was a bit, you know, whatever at dinner. And I remember talking to my friend about it. My friend turned around to me and said to me, he goes, you know, you just got to give the guy a chance. Like, don't write someone off so quickly. Like, you're not perfect. Other people aren't perfect. Like,
That's a good friend right there.
It's a good friend.
Right?
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful he said that. Maybe the guy was a little bit nervous, Ambi, you know, thank God. And because I was kind of like, oh, this guy's a little bit shy, a little bit nervous. I could tell he's a really lovely person, but I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have that like passion and that kind of connection with him because of those reasons. And my third, fourth date, I was like, okay, yes.
You're sold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank God.
You know what I love about this is in both the story of meeting your partner and in your fertility story, you mentioned two things. You mentioned taking the pressure off just a little bit, and that's when it sort of happens. And then also just allowing yourself to trust and not be so judgmental, just trust and relax and sense into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess those are things that I encourage everyone to do.
That's such good advice.
The work started even before I met my husband, you know, in terms of my physical health. But once I met him, the work was really sort of emotional as well and spiritual and psychological. And it's, you know, manifesting these things in our life. Like, I hate to say manifesting a child because it sounds really just, how can you talk about manifesting a child? Because it's just child is such a magical blessing to receive in your life. But bringing that miracle in, to me, is mind, body, soul.
It's like allowing the child.
Right? Exactly. Bringing
versus
space.
Manifesting feels like if you just work harder, or you write the list better, or you wish enough, it'll happen.
Exactly.
And that's not necessarily fair.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you said that. That's a beautiful way of saying it. It's not manifesting. It's just making the space, really, and allowing that miracle to take place. You know, the thing with trying to have a baby or trying to get pregnant is you're so focused on it that you kind of almost can't help but feel the lack of it. And I had to almost get myself into the mental state where I felt like a mom already, you know? And I did that through meditation, through affirmation, through visualizations. And I really believe that helped draw in the pregnancy and the baby.
Ooh, that's making me want to do a visualization now. Thank you.
Do it.
So just a couple of questions, because I want to go back to one or two of the things that you said earlier. You used a phrase that really just has been sticking with me through the whole conversation, and that was that you were preparing to have this legacy. With Asher, he is a legacy. When you think about legacy, what is the legacy that you want to leave him or leave us?
Gosh, what a question. The legacy I would want to leave him is just love, you know, really just like he is our love. He is our love in human form. And he is such a mishmash of both of us. He really is from how he looks to his temperament. And he is our legacy of love. What I want to leave him with is all the lessons, you know, with Kevin and I meeting later in life and experiencing so many things later. Like, we've been through our own journeys. We've learned a lot on the way. And, you know, I think we're a lot more relaxed about parenthood than perhaps if we had been younger. We just have a much more relaxed approach to everything. And, you know, I mean, he'll tell us in the years and decades to come. I hope that he will say this, but I hope it makes us better parents as well, because I hope it really allows us to embrace who Asher is and to guide him. And like, we feel so honored that his little soul chose us as his guides in this lifetime. And we feel that he chose us at the perfect time for where we were in our evolution so that we could best support him. And his legacy is going to be his legacy. But I think that having hopefully a really strong foundation of, you know, two parents who really love him and love each other strongly and a home where he's brought up with a lot of laughter and a lot of love will hopefully help him be whoever he's meant to be, but be the happiest, best version of himself. And that's all I want for him.
Don't we all want that for ourselves and our loved ones, to be the happiest, best versions of ourselves?
But we do, but then so often don't we get caught up in the stuff that's not really that important? I know I do at times. And then I bring myself back to my family and I'm just like, this is what it's all about, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you're using your family as a touch point, like a grounding stone or something.
So grounding.
Yeah.
Seriously, babies are actually very grounding. Some people might think that they're destabilizing and, you know, they are chaotic, but I found him so grounding.
I've actually never heard that. I always think of them as loud and chaotic and needy and loving. And, you know, there's so many wonderful things about them, but I've never heard grounding.
They do. They bring you back to the present moment and they bring you back to yourself, because in your baby's, you get an email or something that disturbs you or see something online or whatever, and then your baby looks at you or needs you or whatever, you're just like, by serving them, by taking care of them, by loving them, you're doing a great job, because that's just taking good care of another human being is a great job in itself, but it also just brings you back into the present moment. And I'm so grateful for that. But again, had I have had babies even 5 years ago, I don't think I'd have been saying that. So for me, it really happened exactly when it was supposed to happen, even if that is later than I would have liked. And at a time when society thinks you are deemed, geriatric or whatever, it was perfect divine timing for me.
Do you think that's still true? I know the terminology around pregnancy, the scientific terminology is geriatric, but do you think society looks at older parents a certain way?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've got better at it. I think society's got better at it and less judgmental, but I still think there's a lot of like, ooh, oh my God, so when your child is this age, you'll be this age. Oh, this, that, and the other. And I think people are having children later in life, but I still think there's some judgment about it and some sort of little comments that can be made. And I remember even a good friend of mine, she's now 40, but before she was 40, she was talking about having her second kid. And she was like, oh my God, I don't want to be having my second child at 40. And I was already 40 and trying for a baby at that time. And I was like, hey, by the way, you're talking to somebody
last thing you want to hear.
Yeah, I was like, I'm actually 40 and I haven't even had my first baby yet. So, be kind. And, it was her stuff. It was her stuff. I hope that this also changes some of that narrative about age, because I do think people are having children older. And I'm not saying that that's right for everyone, but I also think we should take away some of the judgment from it and understand that just as there's many ways of having a family, not everyone does it, with a partner, not everyone does it biologically. And I think that we just have to understand that some people are meant to have babies and start their families in their 20s, maybe even early 20s, maybe even their teens. And some people it's going to happen in their 40s and older. And there's no right or wrong. It just is what's right for that unique soul or those souls and their journey.
What a great reminder. And that actually brings me to one of my favorite questions of the podcast, which is, in a few words or a sentence, how do you define family?
The only thing I can say is just love and connection. That's what family is for me. It's just that unconditional love. And it's really that commitment and that connection. It's just, to me, it's just that, it's that happy ever after, as cheesy as that sounds.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Ambi, where can we find you? Where can our audience find you if they're looking for you?
Well, you can find me online. My website is alchemywithambi.com, www.alchemywithambi.com. And I'm on Instagram at alchemyambi. I do post a little bit and share on there. I also have a podcast called Alchemy with Ambi, which is kind of a self-help, life coaching, personal development type podcast. So those three places are where I kind of share, whether it's posting little snippets on Instagram or, the odd journal blog post on my website.
Well, that's great. We should definitely take a listen or go look at those sites. Thank you so much for your time. It is such a pleasure to speak with you always, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Julia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.